Good day, everyone. Hope you are well on a long weekend. Very long weekend that we have, and I hope everybody is doing well. I just want to check if we are all set and if I'm audible. Right, and my screen is showing exactly what you're supposed to see. Right, so today, basically, our presentation is going to be very short and where we are going to discuss all things assessing postgraduate dissertation and thesis in the age of AI and agentic AI, right? Rethinking rubrics, critical thinking, and scholarly contribution, right? Where your presenter is me, Dr. Moringa, as usual. We're in for it until June, running these free workshops, right? So, um, it's interesting how we have now been ushered in unprepared, right, into an age and time where what you're supposed to produce if you are a student and has been augmented by a third force, which is AI or agentic AI. And if you are a supervisor and if you are a lecturer, how you're supposed to assess the work that you've been presented to has changed, right? Without any preparation or training or heads up to say, hey, this is what is coming. You need to adjust the way you do things, right? Because things have changed, right? We've not been ushered into that aspect, right? So we just caught up into some change, right? So we're going to discuss all those things, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So the fundamental aspect that we need all to agree on and to accept is that postgraduate research has been transformed in a great deal, right? And I always say that a well-written dissertation no longer guarantees deep understanding or critical engagement. So we cannot judge if a dissertation is well written, um, and therefore we say this is a good dissertation, right? And that shift requires a fundamental rethinking of how academic work is evaluated, right? So what we have seen over the few years is that we have seen a transformation from writing alone, where you as a student or as a researcher or as a postdoc or as a PhD or master's, the writing, you're no longer writing alone, but your writing it's now AI assisted writing. I know I was having engagements with one professor yesterday, right? And he seemed to have, very deep reservations on in terms of AI being an assistant in writing, and he brought up a very disturbing term where he regard to the people who are using AI to write the work. He said it's called contract cheating, right? Then I got interested. I wanted to find out what contract cheating is, right? And I realized that it's regarded to the act of contracting your work to an individual or contracting your work to an AI platform so that they will do the work for you. Then you present that work as your own work. Right? But what caught my attention is that where do we then draw the line? Because especially that we are in an age of the agentic AI, right? Would we now regard agentic AI assistance to work, right, to us coming up with our assignments, our dissertations? Would we then regard that as well as to contract cheating, right? So that boggles my mind, and I was like, you know what? perhaps we need to rethink and reconceptualize some of these terminologies, some of these terms and their definitions, right? Because if we still are stuck in the definition of, to say, if you delegate your work to anybody else who is not you, or something else that is not you, right? But then what about ChatGPT? What about agentic AI? What about Gen AI? Right. So those are questions that we really need to think through. Right. But that's not the discussion of today, right? The discussion of today. So we're saying what we see as well is that we are moving from manual research, right? We are transforming from doing research manually to doing research that is AI powered, right? For example, your AI powered analysis. Those who are doing quantitative analysis, you'd know that we now use SPSS, right? Qualitative, we use Atlas AI and the like and the like. So we are actually moving slowly, right? Those who are data scientists, those who are regarded to as data scientists, they are now using cloud AI, right? Code cloud AI to do their data analysis. And it does great wonders, right? It does great wonders, right? So what we also see is that the blurring line of authorship, right? In before the 2019, right? What we had clear authorship to see this is who has authored the work, right? And this person has ordered the work and they submit it is their own work. But what we now see in the agentic AI, we're seeing a blurred authorship, right? Yesterday, a day before yesterday, I was presenting my thoughts at the Nelson Mandela University book and copyright day. And an issue that I was pushing there that I said is that who do we regard as the fountain of knowledge, right? And who owns the knowledge and the work that has been produced on ChatGPT or any generative AI or agentic AI? And because we do not have copyright laws and IP laws that can pinpoint the age of AI, because we're lagging behind, the agreement currently is that the knowledge generated from AI is co-owned, right? It's owned by three fundamental individuals. The first one is the person who is prompted, who is created, who is the user. You as a researcher, you own the output, right? But the person who designed the platform owns the algorithms and the systems and the IP, right? And the platform itself, it has a control as to what and the fundamentals of what you can do, right? So the process of knowledge production, it's no longer and does not wholly lies in the hands of the researcher themselves, right? It lies, it is distributed, right? It is distributed. So what we see is that there's a blurred line between who is the actual original author and who is not the author in that process, right? Because you might actually produce a whole work that you didn't type. Some of those who want to push the argument of authorship based on who was typing the work and who did the original draft, right? So you can actually come up with only key points, right? Then you convert those key points into a solid and rich presentation, right? So that's where we are at the moment, and that's a shifted postgraduate research. And the challenge we're currently having is that we have in the spaces of higher education, we still have people and we still have gatekeepers and colleagues who still think that this whole process of generating work and getting to the final outcome of work is problematic, right? And in as much as they want to regard it as problematic, that is the new reality, and that is the fundamental shift that we see now, right? So we're also seeing the writing intelligence. We used to have the writing intelligence. Right now we have decoupled indicators where the intelligence of a writer does not lie with the writer himself, right? It is distributed, right? So all these changes that has happened in the postgraduate research, ushered in by AI and agentic AI, what they lead to is that they've led to an assessment crisis. Right now, what we find ourselves in is that we have a pre-AI rubric that is being used to assess work that has been generated or that has been AI assisted, right? So we have a rubric that was constructed before we have agentic AI. We have AI, generative AI, used to assess that work that is being produced. And what we see is that we have a problem as to uncertainty of authorship and who really wrote this, right? That's the question. Now, that's the question we are grappling with. And AI blurs the line between a student and a machine, because we cannot, when the work is submitted, right, in as much as we want to use the AI indicators, right, the AI detectors, right, in as much as we want to pick up the sentence construction and say this is phrases are common in AI generated work, right? AI has blurred the line between the student and the machine, right? Because you can generate your own ideas. When we're talking about creativity, if you are creative, right, you can create your own ideas, right? Then you delegate the writing of the whole process to that AI, to the machine, right? And when you are done, when you've done generating that, you regard that as a draft, then you re-edit everything that has been generated with AI, right? That is where we are stuck in terms of our assessments, to say assessment rubrics and saying who really authored the work, right? Should we regard authorship as generating the draft, or should we regard authorship as refining the work, or should regard authorship as the one who has come up with the ideas, right? That's where we are. And our rubrics that are used to assess our work currently cannot pinpoint that. And that's the pitfall of AI detection tools, because AI detection tools, they can only detect the structure, how the work, the patterns within the work, and the similarities they are to work that has been generated by AI. What they cannot do is to determine the origins of the work, right? AI detection tools, that's why I do have problems with them. And I always say, when we're going to talk about cheating and what cheating is, right, within the age of AI, right, trying to to come up with a solid definition of what cheating is when you're using AI, right, we'll get to that. So we're seeing in the age of AI polished but hollow work, right, work that appears highly refined yet may lack genuine conceptual depth, right? I know if you are supervising for the first time, right, your supervision, right, I've also had the same experience, that you will limit your supervision, right? The way you engage with work, you will see that most of the things that you'll be doing, you'll be looking at grammar, you'll be looking at the low-hanging fruits. I was reading a book by Tomaselli. Those of us who know Ken Tomaselli, he has a book on research and other contributors. And Ruth Tomaselli, in that book, what she said was very it caught my attention, right, when she was talking about assessment, right? But that was before the age of AI. She said that examiners look at the low-hanging fruit, right? And I've also been caught up in that as an examiner, in that complex, right, where I look at how the work is presented at first instance, right? I go around looking at citations, looking at how, if they are not right, I go and look at grammatical mistakes, and look at and if the work is flowing, right, the first impression is that the student has done a good work, right? And that approach of assessing work in the age of AI and agentic AI will allow this examiner or the supervisor to have work that lacks depth, pass through and slip through their fingers, right? Based and only because there are no grammatical errors and the English is reading well, right? And I know for a fact, if you are in publishing, you have a writing journal articles, and the first impression that that reviewers have been having on my work, right? And I'm gonna say this, I'm not gonna shy about this, is that I've over the past 3 or 4 years, the first comment that I'm getting from reviewers is that the work is well written and flawless, and it flows logically, right? And the structure is well constructed and everything is flowing, right? And I find that very problematic, because if you have that impression on the onset, right, it affects you critically engaging with my work, because you are enjoying the flow and the grammar that has come there. Why? This has been necessitated and made possible by the AI and agentic AI tools that we're using. So as a result, we are in a paradox, right? A detection paradox, where because you love the English, or because the writing is very good, what you do is you go to use tools for surveillance that you use. What are we saying? We're saying we need to assess understanding without reducing assessment to surveillance, right? This ushers us in the next point that we need to talk about, right? So one thing that I've experienced as I've been consulting and engaging with examiners and supervisors, consulting with them, asking me, what do I think about this particular kind of work? What would I do? What would an objective assessor or examiner do in this particular case? One thing I've seen is that I've come up with the idea of what we call, right, those of us who know the panopticon, right, surveillance and the panopticon, right, and surveillance in the academic environment, right? So the argument that I'm driving home is that behavior changes when an individual feels that they are being observed constantly, right? Those of us who know psychology will confirm and attest to this, right? And students tend to regulate their behavior based on the possibility of being watched, right? And compliance becomes more important than intellectual exploration. And students may then prioritize appearing original over genuinely developing ideas. And what do I mean by this? What I mean is that the panopticon is an idea that you are constantly watching you, right? So when we put in plagiarism software or Turnitin, and in the head of the student or the master's or PhD student, the moment they know that their supervisor has put in these places for them ahead of them submitting the work, right, it will do two things, right? The student in the age of AI, who is using AI, what they will do is that they will be developing their work not to produce original work, but to circumvent Turnitin, right? So they are not worried about the quality of work or the depth of work, but in the back of their head, they say, I need to be aware of Turnitin, right? So because they know that there's Turnitin ahead and they know that there's an AI detection tool ahead, what they do is that knowledge will prepare them to cheat and to cheat better, right? What do I mean? Is that a PhD or master's student will regulate how they use ChatGPT, will regulate how they use Agentic AI, and will regulate how they develop their work. And how do they do that? Right? They will go and generate the whole work on ChatGPT, right? And when they're done generating their work on ChatGPT, because they know that there's a detection tool that is ahead, they know that there's plagiarism ahead, they are going to use a humanizer tool, right? And what they're doing by using a humanizer tool is they're reducing the quality of their work to the standards at which that is not detected by a detection tool or by plagiarism,
right? So I'm saying by us having these tools along the way or between, they do not do the act of improving academic output or integrity. What they do is that they are bringing in the aspect of compliance, where compliance becomes important more than intellectual exploration. Right. I'm not going to be worried about how much I'm going to prompt to come up with rigorous work from these platforms that are there. Instead, I'm always saying I need to comply with AI. I don't have a problem if I reduce my work to that standard where it is poor enough for it to pass Turnitin and poor enough to pass the AI detection tools. I don't have a problem as long as I have below 6% Turnitin and below 6% or 15% AI detection tool. That's not a problem, right? We are then reducing academic output to compliance more than to intellectual exploration. Whereas the tools, the AI tools that we have, they actually bring us those affordances and power for us and capability for us to explore intellectually further, right? I'm not saying Turnitin must be thrown in the bin, right? I'm not saying universities must deregister their subscription with Turnitin, right? I'm talking to a supervisor, I'm talking to a PhD student, a master's student, to say, if you have Turnitin and AI detection tools as your goal, right? As your goal, looking forward to meeting those things, right? You are in a panopticon, right? You have that panopticon, that constant surveillance, right? So what is happening is that the supervisor is constantly surveilling you, or they might not even be surveillance, but in the mind of the student, right? The student always feel that the supervisor is monitoring them, the university is monitoring them, and that's what we call the panopticon, right? So what we're seeing is that the student is prioritizing appearing original over genuinely developing new ideas, right? So that reduces the credibility of one's work, right? Then let's talk about the psychology of observation, right? The psychological effect of being observed, right? So we're saying that observation improves simple task, right? But hinders complex cognitive performance, right? When we're talking about those being observed with the Ternitins in the age of AI, agentic AI, being observed with your AI detection tools that actually produce false positives, right? So we say in terms of enhancing tasks when you are being observed, the small task and the small routine task, it increases them by 85%, right? But when we're talking about complex cognitive tasks, right? For example, developing an entire PhD thesis, developing an entire master's thesis, research has shown that complex, constant observation, right? And the idea that you are being watched, right? And that there is a surveillance tool ahead of you, it reduces cognitive task by 30%, right? And it also diminishes creative dissertation work by 18%, right? So we're saying surveillance by AI tools, AI detection tools, and by the supervisor, by the university, causes anxiety amongst students, right? And we risk intellectual then it causes to intellectual risk avoidance. You don't want to take chances with these AI tools, right? Then you are being predictable. The work that you produce is predictable, and what we see at the end is uninspired research, and research output that comes out there is simply research that is produced for a student to pass and for a student to be compliant with the AI tools that are ahead, right? But they are hidden cost of surveillance, right? The surveillance environment causes student anxiety, avoid complex ideas, a student wants to comply with the rules, then what we have is a technically competent dissertation only. So what your dissertation does, it meets and it ticks the boxes of number one, it's below 6% of plagiarism. Number two, it is below 6% of AI detection tools, right? Whereas the detection tools are positive. But the question is, are current assessment practices undermining the very outcome they aim to measure? Right, that's the key question that we need to ask and answer ourselves. So we need to rethink critical thinking in the age of AI and agentic AI, where we say critical thinking is equals to engagement with difficulty, right? Critical thinking, there is a concept of productive friction that I'm going to bring in along the way. So we say critical thinking is enhanced by somebody who is working through uncertainty, right? You engage with complexity, right? You question assumptions, you examine evidence deeply, right? That's what we regard to as critical thinking. So we say, in a nutshell, critical thinking is thinking that happens with friction. There has to be friction in the way you are getting to the outcome of your knowledge, the knowledge that you produce, right? If it is a rundown or a walk in the park, right? So we're saying friction in the knowledge process, in the learning process, has been reduced, and you see that a student would say, this is easy, right? I don't need to prepare for this. I'm just going to click a button and get an outcome, right? So we're saying abstract definitions, higher order reasoning, and analytical skills, right? That is problematic within when we are looking at your dissertation or your thesis. But we say we need to advance towards practical definitions where meaningful engagement with intellectual difficulty, right? So when we mean by intellectual difficulty, say we need to question those assumptions, we need to examine evidence, we need to engage with complex ideas and work through uncertainty, right? And this leads us to the concept of productive friction, right? So we say, those of us who have done PGCEs, or who've studied how to be a teacher or an educator, right? There's a concept called productive friction, right? And productive friction, it means the challenges that you come across to solve a particular problem, right? So that you can come up with an answer. Right, so we want to apply it in developing a thesis or a PhD in the age of AI. Right. So when we saying that when you're using the tools, right, and when they allow you to have too little friction, right, to come up with the dissertation or a chapter or the outcome, right, that we regard to as shallow learning. Right, you didn't learn anything. Right, when you go to an agentic AI, then you just give it a topic, then the topic comes out, then the outcome comes out, a whole chapter comes out, then you take the chapter, then you go and give it to the supervisor, you go and submit it as your own. We regard to that as too little friction, right? You didn't go through difficulties that are necessary for you to develop metacognitive skills, for you to get to the point where we say you have learned something. And that's the reason why when you are called for a Viva for Share, you struggle to explain the key concepts that are in your work. And that is shallow learning, right? Then we go to the aspect of productive friction, right, which is a green one. Productive friction, where you're getting through difficulties and challenges to get to a work. And when you're using ChatGPT, when you're using generative AI, when you're using your agents, you probe them, you engage with them, you give them prompts, you question the prompts, you get into iterative prompting. and you are not happy with the outcome, you probe again until you say, wow, this is a first draft. And when the first draft is presented to you, you get to a point where you verify every information that is there. But also, let's talk about too much friction, right? Then when we say talking about too much friction is when we having supervisors in the day, in this age of AI and agentic AI, right? There, I know of a colleague of mine in 2024 and 2025 when we just having a conversation about how to do thematic analysis, right? Those of us who are familiar with the thematic analysis, the Brown and Clark thematic analysis developed in 2006 and advanced in 2021, and currently Brown and Clark are actually updating their thematic analysis in the age of AI, right? They put out a call a month ago on LinkedIn, inviting people to say, give us a thoughts on how you think we should update the thematic analysis, right? So I was having a conversation with this colleague of mine in 2024 and 2025. I mean, and I was, okay, the colleague said, I'm teaching a research methodology class, right? And I don't want my students to do their thematic analysis using software or using any technology or any AI tools. And me as a fanatic of AI, and I asked the question, I say, why? Then they say a student must learn the traditional ways of color coding, right? They must learn the traditional ways of coding your work, writing down the notes, going through reading and rereading the work, writing down those notes. That's what are the things that I need to teach in my student. But then I said, right, what would be your rubric assessing, right? What are you going to assess when the student has submitted their work? Right. Then she said, I need to assess the chapter that is well written, that captures the themes, that defines the themes and the verbatims, and that is interrogated, integrated with literature. Then I ask them a question. Then I say, so then if you are not examining the process of how the person developed the themes, why then are you bothered with how the themes have come to place, how the student has developed the themes? Why is it your bother if you don't assess that process? And then they say, no, there's no need to assess the process. Then I said, then if there's no need to assess that process, then there's no need for you to be worried with how a student has come up with these themes and how they've analyzed, because what you are concerned about is the final output, right? Then we had that conversation that was in 2024. Then in 2025, same module again, having that conversation. Then still holding on to those ideas. Then I said, perhaps what you need now is to, in your rubric, you need to capture that you're going to assess, you're going to give marks for a person who's presented evidence of doing the traditional coding structure, the coding of the data, using the Brown and Clark thematic analysis, and you're not going to give much marks to the person who has used Atlas or NVivo, right? So that we also include assessing the processes in that process. Right. That there was no response. Right. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to ensure that there is productive friction, and that productive friction that the student has gone through, right, it needs to be assessed. Right. So we need to assess the challenges that a student has gone through to get up to the final work, because already we've established that the final work cannot be assessed because the final work in itself has gone through different processes, right, of which the student or the supervisor might not be able to pick up who actually is the author of this work. Right. So the rubric, what it should capture the productive friction process, that the challenges that the student has gone through, they should be given preeminence. If the student can capture that, I've used these prompts, this is what I've done, that should be assessed, right? So we're looking at the cognitive effort. Friction the effort required to solve the problems and develop arguments, it should be assessed, right? It should be captured in the rubric. The optimum challenge, stimulate thinking without discouraging effort or overwhelming, right? Then the assessment design, it needs to recognize and reward evidence of intellectual struggle and growth, right? A student must document that this is how I came up to this final work. That should be documented, right? That's what we mean by the concept of productive friction. We're saying let's move away from assessing the final product to assessing the entire process, right? So the learning process, as we know it, right, the learning process becomes mechanical rather than meaningful if there is no friction, right? For those of us who love copy and pasting, who don't get into the engagement with the platforms, right, what we tend to see is that when there is no friction or when there is no productive friction in your learning process, right, you're going to struggle as a PhD or master student when it comes the time to do a viva voce, because already the assessment of a PhD and master's, it requires you to come and defend your work, not defend the final output, but from how you came up with the topic to the prompts to everything that you've done. So what you need to know, you need to clearly engage with your work. Right. So what we need to do is that we need to engage with challenging material. We need to engage with those summaries that we are exposed to. We need to engage in long-term intellectual growth, right? We need to engage with uncertainty and active thinking, and we need to develop the development of ideas and creativity. And this is what captures the learning cycle. And this should happen as a process of productive friction, right? So now let's talk about the issue of AI and the reduction of friction, right? So there are two debates. There is a camp, right? Like a professor I told you about, I had a conversation with yesterday, right? There is a debate as to whether AI reduces reduction of friction, right? Does AI reduce friction, or AI brings its own new frictions? Right. So the question is, the frictions that we had before AI, if they've been alleviated, and have we now developed new frictions, right? So if AI diminishes the friction, the productive friction that we had before, what are the new frictions that are there, and should those frictions be assessed? Right. And I say those new frictions should be assessed, right? So without AI assistance, research took a lot of time. Doing a thematic analysis, a literature review took a lot of time, and arguments built through struggle. You go through a lot of reading to get to an argument, synthesizes, then you need to write and redefine over many drafts. You write again and again, you write and delete. Then the concept deeply, that concept of learning deeply understood, right? It requires you to deeply understand the concepts, right? But now with AI assistance, is that you have summaries in seconds, right? And AI constructs those arguments on demand, right? You can come to it and say, I'm writing this chapter, give me possible arguments that I can follow through without you going through and analyzing and synthesizing the text. It can give you possible arguments. It can give you the gap in literature, right? It can give you the gap in literature, and what you have polished text that generated instantly, and the outputs without full engagement, right? But what happens is that this creates a gap between performance and understanding, right? Because the current assessment, or because I know universities are updating the rubrics, because the current assessment in and in itself, right, was geared towards assessing the final output, right? It falls short in the fact that the process, right, that AI does slips through its fingers, right? Because if you are so much interested in a polished argument, right, as a researcher, that polished argument, the student is going to give it to you as a supervisor, right? If you are so much interested in grammar, you're gonna be given a flawless a thesis or dissertation, right? That is AI assisted, right? Then that output that comes out there, the student really didn't engage with it. All right. So then that creates a gap in terms of the student has performed really, really well, right? The student has done well, they clock 100%, everything ticks the boxes, right, in your assessment rubric. But now the question is, was there actual engagement, right? Now for a bit, let's talk about cheating, right? Let's talk about redefining cheating in the age of AI, right? In the age of AI. But before we get there, let's talk about the old definition, right? So cheating would be rule breaking and misrepresentation of work that has been developed by somebody else as you present it as your work, right? And cheating would focus on compliance, right? We call it discursive rules, right? Where we're focusing on compliance, on whether you've met the Tennessee benchmark, whether you've met the similarity index, whether you've met the structure forms and follows through the rubric or the discipline, right? It was focused on detection driven. It was focusing on binary terms, right? Did you or did you not break the rule? And it on a great deal ignored the learning process, right? It ignored the feedback of how the process of how a PhD student has been getting through to this point of getting to a thesis, a polished thesis, right? I love my colleagues from Nigeria, right? If you look at my colleagues from Nigeria and my colleagues here in South Africa, right? In other parts of the, especially I would say in Africa, right, when they graduate with their PhD thesis or their master's thesis, right, it's a reflection on the struggle, right? If you look at their testimonies, it's their reflection on the struggle. They are talking about how difficult this process was it for them, right? Everyone is talking about I didn't sleep, right? Everyone is talking about my wife gave me a hard time, right? Or my wife supported me. Everyone is saying I fell pregnant. I was pregnant. I was doing this with 3 children, right? Everyone is reflecting on how difficult the process was, right? And that explains something in the learning process, right? That is not examined or that is not assessed, right, in the learning process. Because in the process of developing that PhD, if we ignore that learning process of how the person or how the student engaged with the text, engaged with knowledge, all right, if we do not examine that in the age of AI, if we run to polished work, we are not rewarding the student for the work, for the productive friction that they actually circumvented, right? I'm not arguing for us to reward those who finish their PhD with babies in their arms, but I'm not also advocating for those who didn't. I mean, it's known that you are not going to have sleep. We are going to have sleepless nights. But what I'm saying is that we need to assess that process. We need to assess that productive friction, right? The learning process in its holistic nature. So, but the new definition of cheating would be bypassing intellectual difficulty via AI, right? So the person who's going to be regarded as to have been cheating in this process is the person who has bypassed the learning process using AI, right? That friction that we talk about, that of engaging with work, engaging, coming up with arguments, questioning the arguments, and going back and forth with the text and whatever, verifying the work, augmenting those outputs from ChatGPT, right? That person will be to have bypassed the intellectual difficulty, right? Because it is that process that create the cognitive skills and muscle, right? So we need to focus on the learning purposes, right? We need to have an education-driven approach, right? And the question should be: did AI replace my thinking? And if it did, right, then you have cheated, right? And we need to preserve the learning integrity. Right? So what are we saying? We're saying when AI replaces thinking rather than supporting it, the learning process is compromised.
right? The learning process is totally compromised, and AI should never replace your critical thinking. So let's talk about legitimate versus problematic AI use, right? What do we regard as legitimate versus problematic AI use? The legitimate use would be AI enhancing understanding of complex topics, right? That you know, right? That you've engaged with through your reading, right? AI would be generating alternative perspective to consider, right? What I do with my student is that I give them, I do with them peer review, right? I do with them peer review to say, go and write the first draft. You must write it for yourself, right? Go and write the first draft, right? When you write the first draft, we're going to exchange it with another student, right? Then the other student will peer review that work that the other student is done, right? To check if whether the work was developed by a student or by a human, right? Then in that process, we'll get the feedback. Then when that feedback has come, that same student who was peer reviewing that work, we will ask them to go and peer review that same work using AI, right? Now to see the differences, we'll tell them that, look, if so you thought that the AI, this work was written by AI, is actually not AI that has written the work. Now go and see the outcome that will come on AI and probe and enhance that work, right? This is an initial draft that was done by the student himself, right? Then you have peer reviewed your colleagues' work, and you're looking at the shortfalls in the work and everything that are there, right? But now this AI work was not done by AI. Let's find ways to improve this work using AI. That's what I normally do. So we say AI should support critical engagement with ideas. We need to check grammar and prove clarity using AI, and verify and adapt AI generated content. What is problematic AI uses to bypass intellectual effort entirely? You are just lazy. You just take your topic, you just put it on ChatGPT, then the outcome comes. Then you're generating entire section without thought. You don't even think what is coming out of there. You take them as they are. You're avoiding independent critical thinking, and you're accepting AI output without verification. I always say that AI output should be regarded as a draft, not as the final outcome. You cannot take it and submit it as a final outcome, right? And you're saying use AI as when you use AI as a substitute for engagement, that is entirely problematic. And the distinction lies not in whether AI is used, but how it is used, right? So we're saying within the academic space, we shouldn't ask our questions whether somebody has used AI or not. Use it, right? Use AI. But the question that we need to constantly ask ourselves is, how did you use it? Did you do the legitimate use of AI, or did you use the problematic use of AI? But in itself, this distinction is problematic because we cannot pick up whether that has been done, right? So it lies on the conscience of the researcher themselves. Now, what to assess? What should be assessed in the age of AI? What should the supervisors looking for, and what are they looking for, right? And what should our rubrics look like, right? Number one, we need to move away from looking at grammar, right? I spoke about a quotation from Ruth Tomaselli, where she mentioned that examiners are always looking for a low-hanging fruit, and when there are low-hanging fruits, that thesis or dissertation has 90% chances of passing, right? And that's a true reality, that if your work is presented well, all right, and if there are no flaws in your work in terms of grammar, your structure is following the natural structure, your citations are there, everything is okay, your chances of you having a thesis or dissertation passing are 90%, right? But that is problematic, because what should rather be assessed is the conceptual depth, quality of thinking, not quality of writing alone, right? And because our examiners, our supervisors are busy with a lot of workload, what they tend to do is to look at the writing alone. But what should be assessed is the clarity of argument, right? Logical construction and coherent reasoning, right? This is one thing that supervisor needs actually to look at, the arguments flowing. And seldom do you see a report from examiners or from the supervisor that says there is inconsistent arguments in your literature review, right? There is inconsistent arguments in the introduction or between the introduction and the findings that are discussed. Seldom do we see those, right? Because
they are so much tasked into looking at the quality of the writing, and students need to have the ability to defend their work. Students understand and can justify their work. You should be able to stand there and take us through from the title to the last citation. If you cited Moringa, you should know and you should be able to defend why did you have Moringa, why does Moringa's arguments hold resonance in your work. And we need to be able to interpret. We're saying we need to be able to make meaning of our data and the sources of our data. And we need to be able to synthesize. We need to connect theory. We need to connect evidence. And we need to have a strong analysis that we can defend when we are called to defend our work. And we need to do critical evaluation of our work, question assumptions, and weigh evidence. Right. So these are basically some of those things that we're talking about. But let's talk about indicators, genuine engagement. What do we mean when we say a student or a researcher is truly engaged with work? Indicators of genuine intellectual engagement. Number one, we need to see multiple perspectives. We need to have evidence of engagement with competing ideas and viewpoints across the literature, right? And AI has made that simple again, right? And which is, so we are actually in a fix, right? I'll tell you, we are actually in a fix because we're saying multiple perspectives, they come, right, with AI. It has made those things easier, right? Argument development. We need a clear explanation of how arguments were built, tested, and refined over time, right? Viva for share, these are the things that we'll be asking the PhD master students. How did you get to this argument? If you watch my first video, it's available on YouTube. There's a video that a presentation I did on developing a topic, developing a gap, right? Practical ways of developing a gap using AI. You might need to watch that. And if you watch it, right, and if you implement those things, when they call you to explain how you get to your thesis or your dissertation, you'll be set, and no one will ask you questions because you'd have already been prepared. Right, I'm going to do another presentation on preparing you to defend your thesis or your dissertation in the age of AI, answering the most difficult questions. Right, that's going to be one of our presentation, so that you know and you are prepared to answer those questions, not difficult questions, without you mumbling. Right, so independent reasoning, we say demonstration of autonomous decision making on original analytical thought. Right, we say there needs to be theory evidence link, right? We say meaningful connections drawn between theoretical frameworks and empirical data needs to be done, right? These are the indicators of AI dependency, right? If overly polished writing, right? Supervisors look now, they say your work was too good, right? Flawless prose that lack depth, personal voice or originality, right? It is overly polished, right? But there is no prose, there is lack of depth, there is no personal voice or originality, right? Then generic arguments, claims that are so broad they could apply to any topic or discipline. Your work lacks context, right? And you cannot explain your work, a limited ability to defend the key ideas or explain reasoning behind choices. Then uncritical acceptance, right? So-so claims, acceptance without questioning or triangulation, and there is really no visible evidence of verification, absence of intellectual struggle, the revision history and development thinking. So what I normally ask my students is that I need to see your first draft, I need to see a second draft, I need to see the revisions, I need to see the prompts, and I need to see the final outcome. I'm going to start examining or assessing from the first draft and seeing how it has changed with the prompts that you have used until we get to the final outcome. If I don't see, if I'm not impressed by this whole link, right, and if you cannot present that information to me, I'm going to have a problem with me. And when I'm done, I'm going to sit you down and tell me to explain how you got to this work. Right, so rethinking the assessment rubric. So the traditional rubric had structure and organization, right? It marked structure and organization, and I know that this rubric is still there, still in use, right? Because you say the introduction, it talks about the literature review, talks about the theory, talks about the methodology, then it talks about the presentation of findings, it talks about, right, it talks about grammar, it talks about did you meet the word count, right? It talks about clarity, it talks about presentation quality. it's no longer sufficient in the age of AI, because if you use AI without you engaging with the AI, it can still produce this work. It can still produce this outcome, right? But in the AI era, we're saying the rubric should examine intellectual effort and engagement. And how to see intellectual effort and engagement is to look at the prompts that were used. In the prompts, the follow-up prompts, the iterative prompts, is to look at the critical thinking and depth, is to look at the conceptual understanding, the work, how did you engage with these concepts, right, on AI, and is to look at the disclosure of AI and the verification process that you've done and the independent reasoning, right? So we need to align those rubrics with AI research realities, and the realities are that everyone is using AI. If you are not, you are losing out on the most important tools that might otherwise improve your work. So we need to make thinking visible through reflection, right? So I'm saying that as a PhD student, as an emerging researcher, as a master's student, what you need to do, right? This will save your life, right? From the gatekeepers in higher education, from the senior academics, from those who don't want AI, right? They will look for ways to punish you, right? They will look for ways to denigrate your work and put cold water on your work, right? So what you need to do, my advice to you is that, number one, you need to be keeping a journal of reflective notes or footnotes, right? When you're writing, justify theoretical and methodological choices within the dissertation itself. Always have that notes where you're saying, this is how I justified. When you're actually writing or engaging with AI, write down besides on the side, because on the day of presentation, the scholars and researchers are turning that piece as a way to attack other people's work. They're turning that as a way to reduce your work to nothing, right? So what I'm telling you is that have reflective notes. Write down everything that you're doing, have reflective notes, right? Reflect on the process, describe how ideas were developed, write all those down on each and every section or in each and every chapter, and write document how you have changed your chapter from a draft to a final one using AI. Then you capture the prompts and how you refined the work. Then you have the AI iteration logs. Show how you have engaged with AI, how you have evaluated and how you have adapted AI outputs. Then on the oral defense, demonstrate understanding through conversation and live defense. Demonstrate how this whole process has been done. And what I want you to do and I advise you to do is that when the day you submit your 250 pages, I don't know how they are, how many they are, 80,000 or 10,000 words of your PhD, right? You need to submit around 50 to 45 pages. Also, that documents the whole process that you've done, right? Your prompts matrix, how you've done it, and everything. This will save your life. This will save your skin, because what I'm telling you is that on the day of that oral defense, you're going to meet senior academics, you're going to meet scholars who don't believe in the use of AI, right? So you're going to need evidence, and evidence is the only thing that is going to save your work. Right. So the role of AI disclosure. Disclosure is very important. Never submit work in the age of AI that doesn't have an AI disclosure. Right. If you've used it somewhere, right, you need to disclose that AI has been used. Be transparent beyond stating if AI was used. Explain what decisions were made by using AI. Students must indicate how they verified and adapted to AI content, and trust. Shift focus from suspicion to responsible academic process. This is for supervisors and examiners. Then there is need for promote reflective engagement rather than passive AI consumption. This disclosure pyramid is very important, right? The first one is, was AI used? Then you say, yes, I used AI. Then level 2 is, how did I use AI? Then 3, how was it verified? If you can prove these things, these 3 things, we say you have ticked the boxes of AI in ethics and integrity. Right. So moving beyond surveillance, we say we need to move beyond surveillance. The goal is to support the development of independent scholar, not to monitor performance. Right, we don't need to be monitoring our students with these detection tools. Right, we don't need to instill fear and anxiety in our students. To if people, our students are always afraid on the base of ethics, right? So we say the surveillance approach, the panopticon approach that I've mentioned, it reduces misconduct superficially, right? I will tell you that I'm of the view that using AI detectors actually encourages cheating, right? Using AI detectors, it encourages students to cheat, right? Because I know that there's going to be an AI detector that is there, that is there. So what I do is that I'm going to create my work using ChatGPT, 100% ChatGPT, right? Because I know that there is a detector that is waiting for me ahead. I go straight to the humanizer. Then the humanizer reduce my work to 0%, right? But because the supervisor of the university is interested in detecting, right? I've passed the detection test, right? If I've passed the detection test, everyone is fine with my work. But did I really engage with the work? Right. Another thing is that the approach of surveillance creates anxiety and fear, and it reduces intellectual creativity. The process of surveillance, the surveillance approach discourages intellectual risk taking. Students must take risk in using these AI tools. They must play around with them, right? If we limit them as to what they must do with them, we reduce the intellectual risk taking. All right, it generates compliance, not learning, right? It treats students as suspect, right? You know that your supervisor is suspecting you of using AI. Now you are finding ways of not meeting those AI. You're reducing the quality of your work so that it meets the AI detection standards. But what we're saying is that let's improve, let's advocate for the engagement approach where we designs for engagement and reflection. Our rubrics should be designed for engagement and reflection. We need to build trust while ensuring accountability and encourage intellectual risk-taking and focus on understanding over output, and also support independent scholar. And the goal is to support development of independent scholars, not monitoring performance, right? Our final reflections, colleagues, is that AI transforms research but does not replace the need for critical thinking. And the challenge is not to eliminate AI, but to ensure it supports rather than replace learning. And assessments in the age of AI must then evolve to prioritize understanding, effort, and intellectual credibility. The true measure of a dissertation or a thesis in the age of AI is not and should never be how well it is written, but how deeply it is understood. Uh, Colleagues, we've come to the end of our presentation for today. Hope you enjoyed and have a good time. Let's hear your thoughts as we reflect and aid each other so that we can hear what you think. Right. Let's hear from you, colleagues. Over to you. Right, let's hear from thoughts from the colleagues. There's a hand from Masango.
Oh, greeting, TR. Good presentation. Thanks with the presentation. On my case, I have a query here.
Yes.
I think it was on December when you were with us. It's Drankensberg.
Yes.
Yes, and you taught us how to use AI using prompts,
Yes.
I did use prompts to write a paper, to write a journal article. Then initially, when I plug in a AI detector, the percentage was 6%. Then I refine it according to my supervisor's comments. Then I refine it, but when I replug it, when I again
What
plug
number are
it,
you?
after I've done correction, after I've attended
Okay.
corrections, the AI detector has increased into 32%. So I don't know how to manage such things.
Oh, all right. So, okay, if I'm getting you right, you're saying you generated the entire paper from AI, right?
Yes, using
Yes.
Right. Is that what you say?
yes, using
All
prompts.
right. Then you, all right. Sorry, the colleagues. There is somebody who is talking. I can't pinpoint who that person is, but can you please mute? Who's that? Who's that? Okay. Just a little bit before I respond. Right. So you used AI to develop that piece of work, right? And now what happened is that you used a detector to detect the level of AI usage, right? Then you did revisions, right? Then the detection went up. Now my question is, when in this process, right, what verification and critical engagement and critical thinking approaches did you do, right? Because I'll tell you that we shouldn't much be worried about the detection percentage when it comes to AI, because we have already established that the detection tools present a false positive, and the detection tools, if anything, they improve cheating, academic cheating, right? Because if you are doing your work for the purposes of avoiding a detection tool, you're going to come up with tricks to avoid that detection tools. Whether you're doing it right or not, right, you're going to do something to avoid the detection tool. So they actually improve, short circuit the idea of critical thinking and stuff like that. So what I want to advise you to do, Masango, is to say declaration, verification, and transparency of what you did is more important than the 36% that you are faced with. That is if what you have done is not over reliance with AI detection tools. Right? That is if what you have done and how you've constructed it, you have critically engaged with the content, you have synthesized the work, you have verified the work, you have engaged with it at a critical thinking level, right? I don't see any problem with the 36% for myself, because what you have done, the 36%, it might be detecting it because your writing approach is from the African perspective, right? Those things are detected by AI, right? The writing, the non-first English speakers, non-English, non-English first English speakers, when they write, their work is detected by AI, or else you have edited the work using Grammarly or Qbot. That work will be picked, will have a high AI percentage if you use Grammarly or Qbot. That work will definitely have an higher. So I'm not sure what you did, but if what you did is accurate, and if you can document what you did, I don't think your supervisor should have a problem with the percentage per se. But if they want you to reduce your percentage, go and summarize, right? Go and rewrite that work, right? Go and humanize that work, reduce that percentage, but you are not guaranteed that percentage is going to go down. Already you've seen that there's no guarantee that the percentage will go down.
Okay. Okay. What I did, it was I used Quillbot Grammarly
Right. So
to correct
if
my grammar.
yes, if you edit your work with Qbot and Grammarly, your chances of it getting a high AI percentage are very, very high. That
So, sorry. What I noticed is that when I can plug it to Humanizer, the content will will be diverted to something else, or to a general English. It will be not be scientific or technically. So that is why I I do not like to plug it on humanizer, because I saw that with humanizer it changes into a general English. If it was scientific, it was like if I'm using scientific words, they could change it into general English.
Okay. Right. You from DUT. Unfortunately, your university doesn't have a clear policy as to when it comes to AI and AI detection tools and humanizers and stuff. Right. There's really not. But I see Gilbert wants to chip in. Gilbert.
Thank you so much, Doc, and thank you, Masango. If I just want to clarify that if it's an article, you would see that if you have a journal that you want to submit to, they all have AI policies, and they recommend you to declare how you use the AI in your work. So obviously, the most important thing is the integrity is on your side. Your argument, just ensure that your argument is well positioned, and there is no it has not been altered by AI. The most important thing that you need to ensure is whenever you develop your work, ensure that your argument and your work is representing what you want, not what AI is generated for you. Because remember, your prompting and your guidance is what is key. Prompting is just there to guide the tool to produce what you want, not that the tool is going to produce what you consider is authority. You are the authority in the process. Therefore, you guide the outcomes, because sometimes they are generative tools, so they might generate lies convincingly. So if you just take it as it is, it becomes problematic. So you are the scholar. Therefore, the scholarship remains with you, and it's your responsibility to ensure that the paper you are producing is representing and reflecting your scholarship, not the scholarship being produced by AI. AI is simply facilitating the process so that what used to take you 10 days to do, you can do it in a day. But your scholarship should not be questioned in any manner or in any process. So that's what is important. The other things are just XYZ. It's not the primary. If it's an article, you can publish it and declare that I used the AI in the process and doing ABCD. That's what is important. Thank you so much.
All right, there's another hand from Peter and Obert. Let's go, Peter. You can go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Moringa. I really appreciate the lecture. So interesting and so enlightening. So take for example now, I want to publish in high impact journal, let's say Q1 journal, and is a kind of research that they need a lot of good write-up. And I use AI to get my gap, to get my problem statements, and to get all the core components of that research paper. Then so that the publication can be accepted and the other. So how can I do it in such a way that because it's going to be so perfect to understand that how can I report to them concerning all these steps that I've taken, or how should I go about it if I want to publish in high impact journal? How can I effectively use AI? Maybe to get some data points. Maybe I want to do coding and all those kind of a thing, and I need to run a simulation and all those things, which AI can do very well. How do I report? How do I go about it? academically
so
so that it will be sound.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, that's a very interesting question, right? So if you look like what Dr. Gilbert has said, every journal, right, especially the Q ones, right, high impact journals, right, I've done work, I've published in that area, right, a lot, right? So what they look for, what they require, right, is honesty on the part of the researcher. Do you get what do I mean that by that? Their policies, they are acknowledge that you can use, I'll give you an example of Sage, I'll give you an example of Taylor and Francis, I'll give you an example of MPDI, Wiley, and Emerald. Those journals, they accept the use of AI, right? They accept that you can develop your work using AI, right? What they require is you adhere to the aspect of academic integrity, which is number one, you need to disclose how you've used it. And by disclosure, we mean that a disclosure, an example of a disclosure statement that I'll give you is to say, this manuscript, right, was developed with the assistance of AI ChatGPT 5.2 version OpenAI, right, 2026, developed in USA, right? The literature review structure was developed using a different set of prompts, right? The prompts annexure C, prompts in annexure A, right? Then the synthesis of the literature was also assisted with that same ChatGPT, right? I searched literature from these platforms. I used Google Scholar and Scopus. I've used that, right? Then the methodology section, right? I didn't use any AI because the methodology section, I reported what I've done, but then the data analysis in this section was also enhanced by the process of generating themes was done. The coding and process was done with the collaboration of the researcher and AI, where the AI was used to refine those themes, right? But the reporting of the data was done by the researcher themselves, right? Then you say every output that came out from this platform, this process, right, was verified by the researcher using their critical judgment, and there is no fabrication of data or findings that took place in that process. All data reporting and the data is original from the field that was done, from the data collection that was done by the researcher, right? The editing was done by Grammarly, right, version of Grammarly, and when you did it, right, then you say, I normally say, I'm aware, right, this is the disclaimer that I put forward, that I'm aware, right, and I want it to be made aware to the editors as well and everybody else that the process of editing my work with Grammarly might lead to false positives if an AI detector is used for my work, right? I'm putting it out there that even if they would detect it, I've already said that I've used Grammarly and we have evidence that the use of Grammarly increases the AI detection percentage. That's my disclosure statement. I've covered myself, my data, I've covered my literature review, I've covered myself from anyone who's wanted to detect my work, right? And I said there is no work, any work that is plagiarized in this work. Then I close up a Q1 journal, right? If your arguments are coherent and fine and tight, a Q1 journal will not have a problem with your work. It will be published. What is important is how and to what extent did you disclose? Were you honest in your disclosure, right? That's what is important. In a PhD thesis, right? I assisted one student last year to come up with a disclosure. I sat them down and say to them, write everything that you will ever do on ChatGPT when you're writing this thesis, right? Write anything that you think you did on your ChatGPT. And the beautiful thing about ChatGPT and generative AI is that they have memory.
So you can go back to ChatGPT and say, oh, on this literature review, generate for me a table of the prompts that were used to generate this literature review. Generate the iterative prompts, the whole process, write the whole process. That's what we went to do. So you're now using ChatGPT to develop a disclosure of what you did using ChatGPT, right? Then you verify again to see if that disclosure is actually what you did. And the results, when the results came back, the examiners did not have a problem because the disclosure was tight, and the disclosure acknowledged that the data was analyzed, the themes were generated using ChatGPT. It's there, it's documented, right? It's documented, but the verification was done, the analysis was done with by the human. So the thesis itself, it was termed a human AI collaborated developed thesis, right? And nobody had a problem with it. Why? Because of the extensive disclosure that the student did, right? And also the disclaimer about possible examiners who want to upload your work to say, I'm aware also. And normally what I do is that I'm aware, right? And I request that if before anybody upload my manuscript on any AI detection tools, they must request for my permission so that I know which tools that they're going to use. Because I've already uploaded my work. If they need an evidence, I can send them my report from Qboard, so that they should go and upload on the same platform, because they upload on a different platform, they're gonna have a different outcome. That's how it is, and that's how you should cover yourself. That's the kind of disclosure that is required in the age of AI. If you don't want to have problems with anybody, because people are there to pour cold water and people on other people's beautiful work. Peter, over to you. Was it Peter or Obed? Is it Peter or Obed? Obed.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for the reply. It was very sound and
Yeah. Yes. Thank
instructive.
you.
So
Thank you so
now,
much.
take for example, now if someone should use, let's say, ChatGPT to prompt and get some information, and he declared the use of ChatGPT, you know that every day is evolving. Today we can have ChatGPT 4.7. Tomorrow we have ChatGPT 4.5. Okay. So what you are saying now is that if it is ChatGPT 4.7 that I use, that's what I should put in my work.
Yes. The
Okay.
version is required. The version is
That
required.
version. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. The
Okay.
version is required. Right. There's that Obed. You have a hand up.
Sorry, I think my question is answered.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Obed. Thank you. I really appreciate it. All right. Any other thoughts, colleagues? Any other thoughts, ideas? All right. I'm gonna go 1 until 5. Any other comments? 2. Any thoughts? 3. Right. There's Tapeli. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Doc, and good morning, colleagues. My concern or my comment or contribution after your presentation, I feel that there's a need also for this in undergraduates, for this to be implemented, or even as a teaching methodology, how to teach students still at the undergraduate, so that by the time they come at postgrad, then we don't have issues with surveillance. Then we can easily assess the process that they went through, and that way we have preserved our students' level of critical thinking in this AI age. And if we can do that, I think we would have done justice as academics. Yeah, thank you.
I agree with you. Very, very well. I mean, that's well said. Yes. I think you see. I'm an advocate, and I've traveled a couple of universities from
from 2022, when ChatGPT came, right? I was one of the first persons to advocate for the use of AI, and I had a really, really difficult time from my colleagues at work, right? I was at TUT then. It was a very difficult time, right? And I tried to say, look, what this AI that's coming, if you're not using it as a lecturer, it doesn't mean the student is not using it, right? Because we know that human beings and students have a long history of cheating, right? And regardless of what we might want to achieve, right? Human beings always find easier ways of doing things. They want to reduce friction, right? And that's why I brought up the concept of productive friction, right? They want to reduce that friction of getting to the outcomes, right? If there was a way to live life, everyone would find someone to do their work for them, right? If there was a way to do it, that's what everyone would do, right? Because nobody wants to take those 5 years of doing PhD, those 2 years of doing PhD. And if there was a way of somebody coming in with a book or 1,000 books and pour those ideas in your head and pay for it, everybody would do that, right? To reduce that friction. So the problem now we're having in university is that the slow response and reaction to AI, right? Everyone was excited now last year, 2024 and 2025, about AI, the senior academics, the professors, everyone is talking about AI. But I'll tell you that now, by the end of 2026, right, everyone will be back in their corners, right? Everyone will be back in their corners. No one is going to be talking about AI. No one is going to be writing about AI. What I'm telling you now is that all the undergraduate students, they are on a autopilot, right? They are on autopilot. They are using AI however they want to use it, right? Unhinged, unregulated. The policies are there, but there's no enforcement. The supervisor, the lecturer themselves, they don't know how to verify. They have not been taught how to verify. They're doing things from their own hand, from their own head. This lecturer in the same discipline or department is doing this, the other one is doing that. There's no standardized approach to manage this, right? So that's the problem, and we're gonna be in that fix for quite some time, and it takes us as lecturers, as emerging scholars, as PhD students, because we are the generation of tomorrow. We are the ones who will be occupying. That's why we're having these free workshops to go and say, no, this is how we need to do things. This is how we can transform our disciplines, with AI. So you are right, and I agree with you that it's needed. It's actually to teach students from high school how to verify content. It's a necessity. All right, so that was the last hand. I'm just going to. I'm just checking. There was a hand from what? There was a hand from from Narisha. There you go. There you go, Narisha. You can go ahead.
Hi, Doc.
Yes.
Can
How are
hear
you?
me?
Yes, I can. We
I'm
can.
good. I think the key takeaway here, as you mentioned, is our honesty, our own consciousness, our clear, precise principle declaration of how we went about using AI. What I did find in my process, I'm also towards the concluding ends of my thesis, is that ChatGPT gives you further prompts of saying, can I now put together a journal article of 4,000 words for you, or I'm able to also do a literature chapter review or a discussion chapter for you. And as human beings, we tend to want to go ahead with those prompts to see what could come out. So in having to declare our honesty on this, we read the prompts, we go through the prompts, but it may not always be accepted by us in terms of our application into our actual article or into our actual thesis. So do we go into that depth of describing what we've accepted in the prompts from AI and what we haven't accepted.
So do you can you please shorten the question quickly? The last part, I didn't get the last part.
So I just wanted to find out, do we then declare what prompts we have used from AI and what prompts we've declined or have not or ignored using from AI? So do we go into that detail and that depth?
Right. So that could be you going a step further, right? So remember when your PhD, I'll tell you for a fact that the process of knowledge production, right? Or it's not solely owned by the researcher or the student itself, right? So if you come out and claim to be the sole originator of knowledge in your thesis, right? That's problematic, especially when I'm examining your thesis, because I know that ChatGPT has given you some prompts, right? And you probably clicked on those prompts, right? But the declaring that this thesis was a collaboration of a human and an AI, right, covers you in that respect, right? But what you're gonna need to do, Narisha, is to have a matrix table, right, that capture the prompts that you prompted ChatGPT and the ones that ChatGPT gave you and that you accepted, right? That's the level of honesty and disclosure that you might need to do. But the statement that says the work was a collaborative effort between AI and the researcher, right? It covers everything, because we know from a fact that those follow-up prompts come in, right, and you verified those prompts, you decline or declined. But that statement will actually, and I'll give you a kudos for that. I mean, that level of honesty is actually, and disclosure is actually commendable. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so I'm just gonna look at the questions in the vein of worlds that now relies on AI. Is something that one can't ignore, especially in academics. However, one needs to use it a smart way and not rely on it for everything and anything. Makes the brain lazy. Right, looking for comments. There are no more comments. Okay, can we please have access to the recording of this presentation? Peter, we are live on Facebook and YouTube, right? So we are live on Facebook and YouTube right now as we are talking. So you can go back and have access, and you can share that with your colleagues. Right, so colleagues, I think we've come to the end of our presentation today. It was really nice having you and participating in our presentation. We're gonna be back tomorrow, same time and same place. Hear what your thoughts are as it regards to the AI and its integration, right? I want to advise you to say, spread the word, invite us to your university so that we can do AI and ethics retreats, workshops, master classes. We teach you how to ethically develop your work with AI and without compromising the aspect of academic integrity. Right, with that, I leave you. There's Nwabisa, you said tomorrow. Can we have the email and Facebook, right? The email is, I'm going to put the email there. It's info, right? Info. All right, we are streaming on my Facebook and my YouTube. So it's TP Moringa. We're streaming live straight from TP Moringa. Right, you can check that on Facebook, right? For inquiries, I'm putting an email address here in the chat so that you can info at mg.co.za, right? Don't struggle alone. If you have any question, I'm available for free consultation every 30 minutes a day, right, who can contact us, then we can have a conversation with you and hear what your struggles are and how we can assist in that regard. Thank you so much, colleagues. It was nice and a pleasure having you attend our session. We really value your time in a time where you're supposed to be resting and spending time with family. Thank you so much. Let's meet next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Doc. Bye.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you, bye. Thank you very much.